Welcome. Thank you for joining us. You're watching Eye on Harvard, brought to you by In Time TV. I'm Ogan Gurel. Eye on Harvard broadcasting worldwide, the world affecting Harvardians and Harvardians affecting the world. And today we have a very special show, a very special guest, David Wilhelm, known to many of you. Welcome, David.
Good to see you.
Good to see you. I'm going to introduce you formally, and then we'll get right into some very compelling discussion, given events going on.
If you say so. All right.
Well, I know so.
Good.
Thanks for joining us. So, David Wilhelm, the world of politics and the world of venture capital. David is the founder and president of Woodland Capital Venture Management, a company that raises and invests private equity and venture capital in areas that are of the country that are traditionally underserved. In fact, has become one of the leading sources of capital in the Midwest. And, of course, David is very well known for his extensive political impact and influence. He was the campaign manager of the 1992 Clinton campaign, and thereafter became the youngest ever chairman of the Democratic National Committee. Has also been involved in a number of political campaigns since then, and very interestingly, also now very much supportive of Barack Obama, Senator Barack Obama. Right. And so we're going to talk about that. Obviously, very involved and at times, how should I say, sometimes not focused on the issues campaign. And given
long
campaign,
right?
And given our format here, Eye on Harvard, the hour-long show that you can watch worldwide, hopefully we'll explore some substantive discussion.
Excellent.
And then, of note, David is a graduate of the Kennedy School of Government in 1999 and was 1991, and was also a fellow at the Kennedy School. And hopefully we'll touch a little bit upon that.
Very good.
So welcome, David.
All right. Thanks for having me.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about. You're welcome. A little bit about your career. And in particular with reference to the 1992 Clinton campaign.
All right.
You were campaign manager.
Right.
We've seen campaign managers come and go in the current campaigns, and you were obviously Democratic National Committee chair, and we've seen a lot of controversy around that. How would you compare and contrast, sorry to use those terms, what happened in 1992 with what's happening now?
What's happening now? What are the big differences? I would say the fundamental difference between 1992 and today is the role of the internet in campaigns. I think campaigns are fundamentally different, probably on balance better because of the existence of the internet and the role that it plays in politics. And the reason I say that, there are two fundamental reasons for that. One is it has had an enormous, small d, democratizing impact on the way money is raised. Barack Obama, in some ways his candidacy wouldn't even have been possible 16 years ago because then you raised it, donor by donor. The role of very wealthy donors was paramount at that time. Today he's probably approaching 2 million different donors. Small donations matter. You can fuel a campaign that way, and that is good for democracy, and that has fundamentally changed our political system, and I think in a good way. The other way is that I think voters, activists can participate more easily in the political process. Prior to the internet, television was the end-all, be-all. Recipients of information from television are passive, so you raised money to run ads that were viewed in a passive way by voters. And today, with the internet, I think it is more participatory. People are more engaged. I think that's a good thing. And you see it playing out in the Democratic primary, where you have high level of enthusiasm, high level of additional participation. And I think at the end of the day, that's a very good thing.
And in fact, I think that reflects, to your point, David, the evolution of the internet. Because to some extent, Howard Dean's campaign sort of started that with the internet. But back then it was Web 1.0, if you will.
Right.
Now we have Web 2.0, and which implies more participatory
Right, the creation of communities,
how should I say, the comments, leaving comments and ratings and Wikipedia and all these sorts of things.
Right.
And I think you're exactly right. The current campaigns have leveraged that, and I would submit it looks like Senator Obama has especially so.
Yeah, I think that's right. Now, it's not without some downsides.
Tell us about that.
Well, you have anybody can write anything they want and stick it, on a blog. And some of those things have, let's say, varying degrees of truthfulness. And so sometimes that's very difficult to deal with. Also, you know, the kind of thing that we've seen play out with the Reverend Wright issue, you know, where a YouTube video is played over and over and over and over and over and over again, and you kind of lose perspective on maybe some of the a broader delineation of the issue involved. But you know what? I'm going to argue against myself here. For as many people as watched that video, I think even more people watched in its entirety Barack Obama's extensive speech on race that came on the heels of that issue exploding. So I really think when you look at it in totality, or even look at it for a brief period, one has to conclude that the impact of the internet on our political process has been a very, very positive thing.
Sure, I don't want to sound political, but as we know, Donald Rumsfeld said at one point that democracy is messy, and I don't want to make comparisons to chaos in Baghdad, but there are rough edges, if you will, to that participatory process.
Yeah, if you can't stand the heat, don't. What's the saying? If you can't stand the heat, stay out of the kitchen. Stay out of the kitchen. It is messy. Sometimes a little messier than it needs to be, but you know, that's at the end of the day, the more people that participate, the more people that have ready access to information about their candidates, the greater extent to which the conversation is an interactive one rather than one way, we are better off as a society. So
exactly.
Yeah.
So I think that bodes well. I mean, there's a lot of rough edges. Now, in terms of this compare and contrast, I don't want to put you on the spot, but you are Democratic.
But you're going to.
You are Democratic National Committee Chairman, and of note the youngest one, and we have some difficulties and challenges in the process. What would be your advice to Howard Dean, or how would you approach it, or what would be some suggestions?
You mean with respect to the campaign right now? I don't know. I'm not sure he needs my advice on this. I'm not sure there is much that he could do differently. You know, you look at kind of the way it's played out. He had a process. People in the National Party and people at who represent the various states and various geographies of the country came together and agreed upon a set of rules that were to govern this process. Now, in retrospect, some people aren't wild about those rules that they agreed to in the first place.
Right.
But that's not the way the world works. So I think Howard Dean has done a good job of saying, look, we had a set of rules, we agreed to them, we need to abide by them, there will be penalties for those who violate them. And
we'll return there right after the break.
Very good.
Hi, I'm Michael Momando. You're watching the In Time TV network, where professionals save big time connecting with their community worldwide. If you're in the restaurant or hospitality industry, I invite you to tune in to Restaurant Talk, where you can email or call in questions, comments, or concerns. You may even be a guest on our weekly Saturday show. To see a recent tasty episode of Restaurant Talk, please tune in to www.intimetv.com.
When someone abducts a child, they're not about to advertise it. But we will. Sign up at wirelessamber-alerts.org to get free Amber Alert text messages on your cell phone. Help put a child abductor out of business for good. Wireless Amber Alerts. A child is calling for help.
Gurel, the world impacted by Harvardians and Harvardians impacting the world. Our very special guest, David Wilhelm, a Kennedy School graduate. We'll talk a little bit about your experience there. He goes without introduction, but campaign manager for Bill Clinton in 1992, Democratic National Committee chairman in 1993 and the 1990s, and very much involved in the venture capital community. Welcome again. Just before break, we were talking about, and I apologize, I phrased it in this way, you answered very appropriately that Howard Dean doesn't need your advice, but you were commenting on this difficult situation.
Well, take Senator Clinton's campaign right now. They're saying, oh, my goodness, we need to count the vote that occurred in Michigan or the vote that occurred in Florida. The fact is that the Clinton campaign and all campaigns agreed not to campaign in Michigan or Florida. That's what they said. They pledged them that they would not campaign there, and now they've changed their mind. I think Howard Dean's been absolutely consistent, said the rules are the rules, everybody will abide by them. You know, one of the rules that we have right now, for better or worse, is the role that superdelegates play. I think he's basically done what he could do, which is to be a fair-minded referee and to consistently insist that the rules that were agreed upon are abided by. So
I guess that's the role of a Democratic National Committee chairman.
I think it is. It's not the greatest job in the world, by the way, but absolutely, actually, it's a good job, but it's not without its challenges, and certainly this prolonged race has created a number of challenges.
Sure, and then I think one of those challenges, and I want to speak in a broad level, practical as well as philosophical to some extent, it's raised the whole issue of the superdelegates, the delegates. I've been, following, as many people, the campaign, and to the Web 2.0 point, I've been reading the reader comments in many of the articles, and some people say, how can we have superdelegates? It's supposed to be democracy, and some people say, with the House of Representatives and the Senate bicameral legislature, we never had a pure democracy, and it gets messy and all that. In 1968, we had sort of non-democracy, if you will, the party elders deciding. Democratic Party decided to go more participating, not completely. How is that playing out? Do you think that this whole process will then change that?
I think people are at the conclusion of this are going to take a look at the number of superdelegates that we have. I think we have number of delegates that is approaching 20% of the entire number of delegates to the Democratic National Convention. That may be too many. Now you look at superdelegates and who they are. They're members of Congress. They're governors of the states. They're members of the Democratic National Committee. They're former party chairs like me. But I think a reasonable argument can be made that we have too many. Should they be abolished altogether? Should we lose the judgment of these people and the involvement of all of these folks? I don't know. I got to think that one through. But the only thing that superdelegates need to think about, their charge, is to do that, which is in the best judgment of the country and the best judgment of the party.
Exactly.
I think that it is difficult to do that which is in the best interest of the party and contravene the expressed will of Democrats at the polling place. Or in terms of the pledged delegates or elected delegates that have been chosen in primaries and caucuses to this state. So I don't think at the end of the day that superdelegates will make that choice. I sure as heck hope they don't, because I think the price that we would pay in terms of the divided party would be extreme. So certainly in thinking about what's best for the party or best for the nation, part of that calculation, maybe even a significant part of that calculation, would have to be, am I doing that which is consistent with the choice of voters in primaries and caucuses?
It's a little bit, as we mentioned, reflective of the bicameral legislature concept. Senators should clearly be, U.S. senators should clearly be thinking about the nation as a whole. They can't completely ignore their popular constituencies either.
I think that's right. It's an interesting question. whether I don't think 20% of our delegation of our national convention should consist of unelected unelected delegates. Should we have some? Probably. Do I think that this is going to be reviewed in the years to come? I do. I think we'll probably have fewer going into the next convention.
But not eliminated completely.
There will be. Let's see how this all plays out.
I wanted to talk a little bit about your Harvard experience. You were at the Kennedy School,
right,
a fellow at the Kennedy School. We'll get back to the politics shortly. Tell us a little bit about how that influenced you, your experience, both as a student and later as a fellow.
As a fellow, well, I was part of the MPP program, 1978 to 1980, and how did it influence me? One way it influenced me was it was the first time I was in a big city for any length of time. I'd grown up in southeastern Ohio in a town called Athens, Ohio, home of Ohio University. Lived there all my life, was a townie as an undergraduate there. And certainly one big way Harvard influenced me was first time this small town kid was in a big city, and that was a good learning experience. Probably not what the Harvard trustees want me to say, but that was good. But it certainly, it forced me to compete at a high level. I don't want to say I wasn't forced to compete prior to that, but the first year
challenged you.
It challenged me. My first year was tough. I'm not sure I read all the documents that I needed to read about the Kennedy School because I was not quite prepared for the quantitative nature of that program.
I like to think well.
I did all right. I graduated. I didn't graduate at the top of the class, but I'm a good manager. I'm a good writer. I'd like to think that. I've been told that. It's not for me to say, obviously. I don't want to sound conceited
we'll talk
here.
a little bit more right after the break.
Good.
You're watching David Wilhelm on Eye on Harvard. Stay right there. We'll be right back.
Once they've outgrown their toddler seat, they're still not ready for adult safety belts alone. 4'9" is the magic number. Until then, kids need a booster seat. Make sure your little pumpkin gets there safely. Visit boosterseat.gov.
Protect yourself from mannequinism. Volunteer. Vote. Stay informed. It's easy to get involved.
Welcome back. You're watching Eye on Harvard. David is sort of smiling at the music transition here. We know it's the Harvard fight song. We talk about very, hopefully, substantive issues, and we have with your participation. Certainly very important, the substantive issues, but life is not all that serious, so we have some funny stuff as well.
Right. Well, we were talking about the bright lights and the big city part for me.
Exactly.
After a challenging first year and the second year, at least then at the Kennedy School, you were more able to take to choose classes that you wanted to take.
Yeah.
It was I had a better and stronger academic year, and one of my big memories was I took a class in bureaucracy from James Q. Wilson.
Oh yeah,
great class, great professor, renowned of course,
exactly.
And a class that I was ready for and very engaged in, and I got called on by him in class once. And I answered the question, and I must have answered it well because he stopped everything.
Really?
And he said, "What's your name,
That's great.
sir?"
Interesting.
And
So
I
you had
told
a
him,
fresh outlook.
yeah, so I'm like, oh my God, I got called out in class, and that was a big deal. I also worked very closely with two professors at the Kennedy School. One, Steve Kellman, who is still there and teaches bureaucracy and at the Kennedy School, and the other, John Brock, who is no longer there, who taught management, public management, and I worked very closely with them. And I think the relationship that I had with those two professors are the things that I value most about my first stint at the Kennedy School.
Tell us a little bit. You are now at a more senior level as a fellow. Tell us about the
Yeah,
second
then I
stint.
got brought back as a fellow at the Institute of Politics, and you know, that was very different because the Institute of Politics is not the sometimes quantitatively charged program of public policy. But I greatly enjoyed my time as a fellow. It was time to reflect. I had my family there. We teach a class. It's not a class that students take for credit, but students do come. I had about 85, 90 people every time for my class. And, you know, I sort of a fraud in a way because I would invite people to teach the class on my behalf. So I would have Rahm Emanuel.
That's a benefit. So
Yes, right. It was. No, it's part of what they expect you to do,
exactly.
frankly.
So
I'm teasing. Rahm Emanuel came in. The late Eli Siegel, who was the founder of AmeriCorps, came in. Who else did I have? Oh, you know, the one person that I think students enjoyed most, I called and brought in my alderman from the city of Chicago, 44th Ward. You got it, Bernie Hansen.
Bernie Hansen.
And I think the students, and they're undergraduates that come in and take these classes from fellows like me, I think they got more of a kick out of him and the very pure, sometimes raw, but the pure commitment to public service that he represented. So, taking nothing away from my good friend Rahm Emanuel, Bernie Hansen, I think, really impressed those kids. I had John King come up, who's now with CNN, but it was a great experience, good time, you know, and I sat in on classes.
Biochemistry, I'm sure. No,
biochemistry. I did take.
I was a biochemistry major. I'm joking.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Biochemistry for sure for me, but theology. I took classes at the Divinity School. So it was a great time.
Yeah, I did. You know, the Institute of Politics was great, and I did try to get out there and get involved in those events. I think it was really a great part of the university. In fact, I'm not surprised that the students took to Bernie Hansen so readily, because I think one of the concepts of the Kennedy School is really public service and developing leaders for public service.
Right. Yeah, I think so, and I hope so, and I believe that to be the case. I think what the students saw, here's a guy, got up every day, 5 a.m. You know, what was he doing? The you know, great legislative theories and solutions? No, he's fixing potholes, and he's doing the kind of stuff that people need to have done in order to have a good quality of life in the part of Chicago in which they live. So I think in his own way, you know, his life, his career represented a form of leadership in the public service, and that's a good thing.
Exactly. Well, let's shift gears again, talking a little bit about the current campaign again. We'll talk about this some more, but you represent a very interesting situation, as many people know, very much involved and close to the Clintons, now a Senator Barack Obama supporter, and that has not been uncommon. We see Bill Richardson, etc. Some say shifting loyalties, however you want to phrase it, but making a change, if you will. What do you think is behind that from a higher level, not just you personally?
Well, I can't speak for everybody. I mean, I think Bill Richardson put it well when he said that the highest obligation is to country into party. And, you know, in my own case, man, there's no one that was more loyal to Bill Clinton than I was during the course of his presidency. I mean, when I came back to Chicago,
Sure.
I was a constant spokesperson on his behalf, and it was not always easy to do that. But
All-nighters and all that.
Yeah, well, I was always available to the media to speak on his behalf. And this one, you know, for me personally, you know, life goes on. I have a much closer personal relationship with Barack Obama than I do with Hillary Clinton. So if that were the only issue I was considering, even though I have a very high public profile with the Clintons, my personal relationship with Senator Obama is closer at this point in my life. But I thought hard about it, obviously, and the reason I came down where I came down was that I go back to something Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan said to me when I was working in Washington, D.C., and I was chair of the Democratic National Committee. And he said, you know, if you're going to have real change, you got to have a coalition of 65%. You got to have Democrats, you got to bring in independents, and you got to bring in Republicans.
Right.
And I think Barack Obama has the capability to do that. And I think Senator Clinton, for all her great attributes, you know, she's a fighter, but I think she's also, you know, I think she views the world through a prism that leads to a 51% presidency. And we have problems of such magnitude that I think we need that broader American coalition that Barack Obama can pull together, and that's why I came down where I did.
I think the New York Times had an article about the 60% presidency. That sounds like what you're referring
Did they? They got that from me then.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, we'll be right back. You're watching Eye on Harvard. David Wilhelm's our guest. Stay right there. We'll be right back.
Today, we're moving faster than ever before. Even your ideal prospect will see your ad, click to your website, then decide to read on or read none in a mere 1 to 7 seconds. After that, you become invisible. So what's the answer? How do you capture and hold the attention of your target audience? In Time TV. The In Time TV network broadcasts industry-specific TV shows to the people who buy your products: surgeons, primary care physicians, dentists, podiatrists, chiropractors, hospital administrators can now watch live in-time programs on widescreen, on their PC or laptop while checking email. Shows can even be viewed on a cell phone during a train commute. In-Time TV is peer-to-peer TV that covers the hot topics in industries that you sell to. In-Time TV shows are broadcast worldwide via the internet, yet the cost of running a 60-second commercial is a fraction of what you'd pay for a display ad in a trade magazine. In-Time TV is what your target audience is watching.
Keeping professionals engaged worldwide.
Mom?
Dad?
How long should I wait for you?
If I'm at soccer practice.
What if something happens? Will you come get me?
There's no reason not to have a plan in case of an emergency.
Should we go to the neighbor's house?
And some extremely good reasons why you should.
Can you tell me?
Talk to your family about what you would do in case of an emergency.
Welcome back. You're watching Eye on Harvard, and then you were also talking more broadly about the bigger picture, if you will.
Right, right. Well, I was making the point that I think in these times, these are difficult times for our country. We need fundamental change to occur. We need change in our foreign policy. We need change in Iraq. We need change in the economy. And to bring about real change, we need somebody capable of putting together majorities such that that change is sustainable, such that that change actually occurs. And I think the kind of president that we need to have is someone who can appeal to Democrats, but also appeal to independents, and also appeal to Republicans, and put together real, sustainable majorities for change. I'm in Ohio right now. I'm seeing what a governor can mean who takes that approach to governance. I think in this race for president, that governor's Ted Strickland, by the way, for those who are from Ohio, but he's working with the Republican majorities in the state Senate and the state House of Representatives to get things done. I think in this election, Barack Obama is the candidate who can and will work with people across the aisle, build that sustainable majority for change. I'm not certain that the arc of Senator Clinton's career suggests she would do the same thing, or the arc of her campaign. So at the end of the day, that's why I decided to back Barack Obama.
That's fascinating, because I think one of the critiques, if you will, has been that change without, how should I say, the policies or the substance. And Senator Clinton has said, well, I have the policies. But what it seems to me you're saying is that the problems require, as we said before the break, a 60% solution, in the sense you have to gather people around. And to the extent that personality and history and other character capabilities contribute to the coalescence of interests rather than necessarily specific policies per se, that's what it seems to be important to you.
Barack Obama has all these specific policies that one could shake a stick at. Right? No, I know you're not, but it's important to say that. I think we could compare and contrast. The policy documents that each has, and I think they'd each be about the same heft. They'd weigh the same. They have people who are advising them who have similar experiences and so on. The question is, what style of leadership is most conducive to actually getting stuff done? And I think the style of leadership that fits this day and age is a style that, call it what you will, some people say it's post-partisan. I don't like that term necessarily, but it's a style that brings people together. It is a style that pulls together people of goodwill, of differing views, into a common cause. Barack Obama's time in the Illinois legislature, his time in Congress, shows me that he can do that. My knowledge of him personally tells me that he can do it. I just wonder whether Senator Clinton, by contrast, she's a fighter, and she'll do whatever it takes.
We've seen that.
And all that, then in some ways is both, is remarkable and a reason for admiration in some ways. It's a leadership style that I'm not sure, though, brings us together as a people. And so I wonder about that. And I definitely believe that Barack Obama does bring that to the table, and therefore he's the kind of 60% president that we need to have if we're going to get our troops out of Iraq, if we're going to reconstitute American foreign policy, if we're going to pass health care reform that will really benefit people that don't have it right now, if we're going to get stuff done that really improves the lives of the American people, then we're going to need to do it in a way that brings us all together. And, in many ways, I think that's what this race comes down to. It comes down to Democratic voters' preference, relative preference for the leadership style of each candidate. Do you like that, the fighter, or do you like the guy that's going to bring us together? and because they agree on so many issues,
Yeah.
I do think leadership style, at the end of the day, will explain a lot about the ultimate outcome.
Yeah, I think, and the reason I mentioned that it's less a matter of policy is, as you pointed out, they all have policies.
Right.
And I think, quite frankly, that there are not huge differences.
Right.
I mean, obviously, they're Democrats, etc. But there is a, however you want to phrase it, and I think you put it aptly, a leadership style, character, personality, etc. That is
Right.
a pretty stark difference.
Right. And I think that's what the essential choice is. And so you see in a state like Pennsylvania, or state like Ohio, which has been rocked by economic challenges and difficulties, and people respond, I think, very favorably to the kind of rocky image that Senator Clinton is portraying right now. So she runs well in those areas. But I also think there are many, many, many Democrats who say to themselves, you know what, it's that kind of talk, it's that kind of negativity, it's that kind of combativeness, it's that kind of stuff that causes gridlock in Washington, D.C.
Sure.
We need to break that gridlock. The way we're going to break that gridlock is by having a president capable of generating 60% majorities. So that is that's a fundamental choice. That's a big thing to think through. And I think one of the reasons this race is so close and this race is going on for so long is the fact that choice is both clear and a difficult one to make.
Exactly. In fact, I read, as I mentioned, in some of those Web 2.0 reader comments and reading through the tea leaves with superdelegates, some of them have switched over to Obama.
Right.
With the reason given, and of course these are 20-second sound bites, that they didn't like the negative politics of Clinton. Now, I think you don't make a nationally momentous decision just on a few negative comments, but I think what it seems to me is that underlies the leadership style that you are talking about.
I think that's part of it, and then I also think at this late stage of the Democratic contest, people are very afraid that if we don't bring this to some sort of conclusion, we're just going to hurt ourselves. But I think that's a big part of it. Senator Clinton, even as she has won Pennsylvania, has been hurt in terms of her image with regard to divisiveness and so on. So
those leadership styles have hardened.
Exactly.
We're going to return right after the break.
Exactly right.
Stay right there. We're right back.
My pot of gold, your daddy's little girl, till heaven hold.
It's easy to tell if you've had way too many. But what if you've had just one too many? Buzz driving is drunk driving.
Hey guys, thanks for coming.
Are we in trouble?
No, you're not in trouble. I just want to set some ground rules.
Like what?
Well, remember last week when you hit Vinny in the head with the shovel?
I do not recall that.
Of course not. Well, it was pretty graphic. Too graphic for the kids. So I'm going to have to block you.
I got to make this up to you. This is Vinny's watch, and I want you to have it. You deserve it.
Thank you. That's really not necessary.
No. Come here.
Welcome back. You're watching Eye on Harvard, and our guest, David Wilhelm. Very fascinating discussion, and we're talking about leadership styles. We're talking about perhaps even the hardening of those leadership styles, and a very clear choice and difference in leadership styles between Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama. Senator Hillary Clinton, Senator Barack Obama. Saw a New York Times article that referred to them as Mr. and Mrs. And the reader wrote back, says, they're senators. Why don't you be civilized about it? It's participatory democracy.
Right.
What's interesting, too, is I think some of the appeal, how else I guess would put it, of George Bush back in the first term was this concept, and I think that has been upturned, if you will, if I might be so bold as to say, that he was going to bring people together and that sort of thing. I think it's a very appealing concept.
Right. One of the mysteries of the Bush presidency, I think, is how different his leadership style was as president from what evidently his leadership style was as governor of Texas, where he was known as a more of a unifying figure, quite happy to work with people across the aisle, not particularly ideological in his approach.
So he wasn't necessarily dissembling when he said that when he was campaigning.
Well, right, and you know, when he ran on the phrase compassionate conservative, and you know, I think it worked in part because it was believable given his record in Texas. But man, oh man, he's run a different kind of presidency than the one that was advertised. But I do think, coming off, you know, our most recent memory of the Bush presidency, which is one of, he's a divisive figure, he's an ideologically driven figure, he's not particularly interested in working with the other side. You know, man, wouldn't it be nice to have somebody that could actually get stuff done, is comfortable in their own skin, and clear about what it is that they want to get done, but is more than happy to work with the other side to forge a coalition for change. And I think, given the lesson of the Bush presidency staring us in the face and more staring us in the rearview mirror, I do think people are looking for a different, more calming, perhaps in some ways, but more unifying leadership style.
Collaborative.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the reason I say that is less to criticize President Bush, and in the sense that maybe it's changed or whatever, but actually to point out a point that, to some extent, a large portion of the population, Republicans and Democrats, back in 2000, were very accepting and embracing, if you will, of collaborative work.
Right, right.
Now, whether they got misled is another issue. But my point is that I don't think it's exclusive to Democrats. That may, in fact, be an appeal of Senator Obama to Republicans.
Right. Well, I think that's exactly right. I think the American people, look, most Americans are not particularly ideological. Most Americans, you know, do not wake up every day, you know, thinking, yeah, saying, how can I tear the, you know, Adam's apple out of my opponent? That's, most Americans are very practical. Most Americans simply want what's best for themselves, their families, their country, and I think most Americans are sitting here wondering, why in the world can't we get stuff done that is long overdue for being done? And they look to the role of special interests and they look at Washington and they see some of the partisan bickering, and I think they're just, I think they don't understand it. They don't get it. They want something new. They want something different. And I think the great appeal of Barack Obama's candidacy is precisely that. Frankly, I think the part of the appeal of John McCain is that as well, because he is viewed as a more independent-minded person.
Yeah.
So there is appeal in that as well. So
I guess the contrast, as it looks like it may come up between Obama and McCain, will be they're both outside, independent, but Obama's more collaborative potentially.
I think that may. I think you may have something there. I think the choice as to who we elect as president is a very, very personal one. People have a very good sense of the motivation of these folks, of kind of what makes them tick, what they're about. You know, we know more about these candidates than any other candidate we ever cast a vote for. And so these issues related to leadership style and the type of person you are, and you know, whether it's friendliness or toughness or leadership qualities of those are front and center in a presidential campaign, and I think they always have been, and I think they always will be.
It's interesting with President Bush, one of his character qualities was loyalty.
Yeah.
And to some extent, a lot of these things are not black and white. I'm making an allusion here, as you can tell.
Right.
But nuanced. So loyalties can be good and can be bad in some ways. When you're loyal to,
say, Donald Rumsfeld to like pick a name out of the clear blue sky, but
and not that.
Yeah, well, right.
So,
loyalty is certainly a good quality, but in a president, loyalty in pursuit or loyalty to incompetence or the pursuit of policies that are working against kind of the reasonable estimation of the interests of our country is no great virtue. So you're right. I mean, but people are smart about these things. People are smart. I'm always amazed at how polling reflects, I think, very astute judgments about the relative qualities of different candidates in a race. So, that's why I look at this current race for the Democratic nomination, and I do think it comes down to the various qualities that are reflected in these candidates, and different sorts of folks have greater appreciation or lesser appreciation for these qualities, and it's interesting to see it play out.
And we're seeing it play out on the national stage.
We sure are.
We'll be right back at our last segment. Eye on Harvard, David Wilhelm, our guest. Fascinating discussion. Still a little bit more to come. Stay right there. We'll be right back.
Any questions?
No.
You know. We're not magicians, we can't read your mind.
We need your questions, each and every kind.
What are the side effects, doctor?
How many times have you done this before?
Will this react with my other medicine? Hey, what are all these tests even for? You have the power to say what's on your mind. We need your questions, each and every kind. Questions are the answer. Questions are the answer.
Welcome back. You're watching Eye on Harvard. I'm Ogan Garel. Our guest, David Wilhelm. We're at the final part of our segment. Absolutely fascinating and I think very important discussion. We've talked about wide-ranging issues about your career, comparing, contrasting the 1990s with the current era, with the internet, the turmoil with the superdelegates and the delegates,
right,
and what some of the implications of that and how that may change, and certainly the choices that are now being made by the American people and Democrats in particular, of course, Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama. And you were saying at one point the American people are very good at discerning, and you have great respect for their ability to discern what makes these candidates tick, because that's really important, obviously. And you're close to, as you mentioned,
right,
to Senator Obama. What makes him tick, in your estimation?
What makes him tick? Great question. In my estimation, they're the kind of qualities that we just spoke about. I think what makes him tick is a desire to get things done, to reach out to others, to build that broader coalition, to be a vehicle through which the aspirations of people are achieved. I think that's what makes him tick. I mean, you see it in his campaign. What makes the campaign tick? What makes him tick? It's the grassroots power. It's the being a voice and a vehicle through which the aspirations of people that aren't always involved in the political system can be expressed. It's the notion that at long last, we can both respect the opinions of the American people and take them seriously, and put together a broader coalition that is inclusive of an energized Democratic base, but also of independents and Republicans of goodwill too. I think those things make him tick. The notion that, you know, through some level of collaboration, some level of intellectual honesty and human decency, we can get things done. I think that makes him tick. So.
Well, it's a great answer. I mean, I don't know the answer. Of course, I'm not as close to him. But if I might venture a guess, I think the body language is very interesting. I noticed when Senator Obama, obviously everyone talks about the words and the policies and all that, and body language is superficial. And I apologize on this substantive show that we're talking about that. But I think it's interesting.
Cues people pick up
Senator
on.
Obama is often with hands outstretched open. I noticed public speaking-wise, he's really looking at all corners of the audience, if you will. And Senator Clinton, and I'm not saying this is bad or good, is very direct, very looking in one direction, often pointing, etc. Whereas Senator Obama is a lot more.
I haven't thought about that, but I do think those kind of visual cues obviously are very important. People pick up on them, and to the extent that those
superficial necessarily.
Right. To the extent that those visual cues are consistent with some of the distinctions that they see already, it just sort of enhances and deepens the opinions that they already have about these candidates. But I do think there's something there, and I do think the fundamental choice at the end of the day comes down to this choice between two very outstanding, excellent candidates for president that have fundamentally different leadership styles and therefore fundamentally different appeals to different segments of the Democratic Party electorate.
Exactly.
And that is fascinating to see play out, whether you're an Obama fan or a Clinton fan or just a Democratic fan, or for that matter, anybody that watches politics.
And saw Rahm Emanuel, Representative Emanuel, on Charlie Rose, and he said all this is good for the Democratic Party.
All this, well,
how should I say?
The prolonged campaign, the prolonged and aggressive campaign. Well, I think it was good until about.
Simplifying his conversation.
Yeah. No, well, there's some. You usually can tell the Hillary supporter by saying, "This is great. Let's go all the way. Let's play this thing out forever." Whereas the Obama supporter generally will say, "We've got the lead. It's impossible for her to overtake it. It's time to bring this thing to a conclusion." So you usually can tell who's supporting whom by what they say.
I didn't interpret it as such from Representative Emanuel.
That's not true for him because I think he's honestly undecided. But I think by and large it's been good, and the level of energy and the number of new people that are coming to the polls, that's all a good thing.
That's what his point
But
is.
I think as it gets more and more negative, as it's more and more tit for tat and back and forth, and I'm not sure it's all good.
Sure.
And to the extent that either of these candidates, well, one of them is going to be the nominee, and I think they will both have significantly higher negatives than they otherwise would. The other thing that's happening is that Senator McCain is being able to reintroduce himself to the American people without any interruption, without any engagement, and with that, right. So I wish that weren't the case, and I also think he's being able to organize his campaign at some level of leisure, and it's time for us to start shifting focus to a general election. Now, the fact is, Democrats, both at the superdelegate level and the rank and file level, are going to be the ultimate decision makers there. When they decide it's time for this thing to come to a conclusion, it will.
Yes.
And I think that the next big point will be at the conclusion of the North Carolina and Indiana primaries. If Barack Obama wins North Carolina and Indiana is pretty close, I think the din from Democrats to bring this to a conclusion will increase greatly.
And specifically the superdelegates.
Specifically superdelegates, yeah. But I think rank and file too.
Well, one last question, maybe a little challenging one, is there's a national perception, and we're here in Chicago, that Illinois politics has some challenges, let's put it that way.
The word dysfunctional. Comes to mind. Yeah.
Obviously, Senator Obama is a U.S. senator. Hopefully, he will not transplant that over to Washington. That won't be the sort of change that we'll see.
Well, I think the great thing, one of the great things about Senator Obama is in this very tough, sometimes nasty, sometimes worse political environment here, he was always an advocate for reform, an advocate for clean government, for clean politics. He's brought that to Washington, D.C., and I think it's an essential part of his appeal.
And so actually one could view that as a positive.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you very much, David.
All right.
It's a real pleasure to have you. And we didn't have a chance to talk about venture capital. Hopefully we'll have you on the show another time.
There you go. Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. You're watching Eye on Harvard. Thank you for being with us. See you next week.